Thank you all for joining us. We've got all the councillors here. That's great to see. I'm just going to start by acknowledging that we are meeting today on the lands of the traditional custodians of this country, the Gumbaynggirr people, a very strong, powerful and knowledgeable people that walked this country for many, many thousands of years and had a really intricate relationship with all the living and non-living parts of this country. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. I'd also like to take this opportunity to also acknowledge our health professionals in particular throughout the Shire that are helping all the things that we need to be done here in preparation for what's coming with the COVID-19 epidemic. I think we're well ahead of the game. I'd also like to express that thanks as well to all those people that are still working in the supermarkets or all around the place. And especially I'd like to thank our staff who I know have been putting in massive hours to pull together our response to the COVID, which we will talk about later on, and all those volunteers that are doing that as well. So thank you all for being here and we'll start going through the meeting. I have no apologies. Item 3, declaration of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest, I have nil. Public presentations, I have nil. Item 5, Merrill Minute, I have nil. Item 6, Notice of Motion, I have nil. Item 7, Resilient Economy, I have nil. Item 8.1, which is the Disaster Recovery and Resilience Funding. Councillors, I'm going to open this up for questions in a minute. I've got you there, Councillor Jenkins. You can have first question. Just let me finish. I will open that up for discussion and in particular questions to the staff. This has been a very complex and fast process, but we have done lots of community consultation, and I will ask the General Manager actually to start by just answering some of those questions that I know have been coming through your emails, but also that we've all been hearing off different people, just for some clarity on some of those issues that have been brought up. And then I will then go to Councillor. So I've got Councillor Jenkins with the first question after we hear from the General Manager.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to bring Council's attention to an email that was sent to councillors earlier this afternoon, which highlighted some minor amendments to the recommendation. So you should all have that. But essentially, the minor amendments are in relation to infrastructure restoration and development. It inserted an additional project, which was options report on alternative routes, $50,000 from the Disaster Recovery Fund. Under item E, personal and community support, inserted an additional item, community get together, $35,000 from Disaster Recovery Fund. And in item F, economic recovery and development, under part 4, insertion of a figure of $45,000. Those descriptors and figures are in the tables within the body of the report, and that is the adjustments that I've read out have been put into, at this point, into the recommendation that sits before you, because that translates the information in the report into the recommendation. In terms of responding to the Mayor's request, and the Mayor has asked me to speak to the issue, and particularly to speak to a number of the issues that have come to Council. And in fact, I'm going to ask the Deputy General Manager whether or not the deputation should be read first.
Sorry, just coming off mute. I think that would be appropriate. Normally we would have the deputation prior to the item being discussed.
So could you do that, please?
Yes. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm just going to read the deputation that we've got for item 8.1. And it's from Libby Park, President of the Bellingen Chamber of Commerce, and it was received on the 1st of April. And I'll read it verbatim. Dear Mayor, Deputy Mayor and Councillors, I understand that you will be holding a virtual extraordinary council meeting on Friday, 3rd of April at 3 p.m. The business papers for this meeting have not yet been made public. However, I anticipate that you'll be asked to review and approve proposals involving the allocation of $1.225 million of bushfire recovery funding allocated by the federal government to the Bellingen community to support recovery from the impacts of the severe bushfires that the country experienced from September 2019 through to January 2020. I was asked to represent business owners in the Bellingen Shire in this process. I also write on behalf of the Urunga Milestone Chamber of Commerce and the Dorrigo Chamber of Commerce. In that role, I am writing to you directly ahead of the meeting to ask you to consider some important points. You will have received documentation describing a process of consultation with various community groups and identifying a number of very worthwhile projects across our community. However, I wish to draw your attention to the fact that the bushfire recovery funds were provided for recovery efforts, not for preparedness efforts for future possible emergencies or crises. That is, they were intended to provide immediate relief to enable communities to recover from the damage inflicted by the bushfires. I've included a link below to a press release issued by the Prime Minister on the 9th of January 2020, which makes this intention clear. Please bear these facts in mind. The $1.225 million funding was provided by the federal government in early January, 3 months ago, to assist with recovery efforts in bushfire-affected communities. Directing these funds toward projects, however worthwhile, that build preparedness for future emergencies, bracket, for example, spending on establishing safe places, installing water tanks to secure our water supplies, etc., close brackets, does not contribute to recovery efforts. One of the main impacts in our Shire was on local businesses, retail, hospitality and accommodation businesses that suffered significant financial impacts. Without support to overcome these impacts, many of these businesses will never recover, especially in light of the current COVID-19 crisis. Tragically, because of the 3-month delay in allocating this funding, it may be already too late to save many of the businesses that were hit hard by the bushfires, and this will be disastrous for the community as a whole. Local businesses provide services to locals, employment to locals, add to the appeal of the Shire for visitors, and contribute to the sense of community and pride that locals have in their places. Without a thriving local economy, Bellingen Shire will become an economically depressed regional town and will be unable to compete with other regional areas to attract returning visitors when this eventually becomes possible. In light of the above, please ask yourselves, do the proposals deliver on the objective of recovery rather than preparedness? Can you, in good conscience, approve the spending of taxpayer funds on a range of programs that include no relief for a hard-hit section of the community where the recovery needs are very great, when you know the likely consequences of failing to provide that support? Do you believe that your approval of funding for preparedness rather than recovery is defensible and will stand up to public scrutiny? As a councillor, you may be asking what the Chambers of Commerce have done about this situation, open brackets, except ask council for money, sorry, not brackets, inverted commas, except ask council for money, close inverted commas. I can assure you that at no stage have any of the Chambers of Commerce asked for money. We have simply represented the interests of our members, the business owners of the Shire, at a meeting we were invited to, at a meeting we attended via invitation. Link to the Prime Minister's press release dated 9th of January supplied. Thank you for your consideration. Libby Park, President, Bellingen Chamber of Commerce, email address, phone number, and that is the deputation read. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. So we'll go back now to the General Manager. After the General Manager, I've got Councillor Jenkins and I've got Councillor Fenton. But we'll list here from the General Manager first. Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. As has been outlined on the 9th of January, after months of being bushfire affected, the Prime Minister announced the immediate base payment of $1 million to 42 affected bushfire impacted councils in New South Wales, including Bellingen. The council was advised of this by phone and then subsequently in writing, and that advice included that the grant was untied. The media release of the 9th of January from the Prime Minister spoke of rebuilding infrastructure and strengthening community resilience, and indicated that the only condition placed on council is that they develop a program of works within 3 months and report back to the Commonwealth in 12 months. Council received correspondence from the New South Wales Office of Local Government dated the 10th of January, indicating the funding is to be spent on projects and activities that council deems essential for the recovery and renewal of communities, that they required a program of works within 3 months and a report on how the funding was to be spent in 12 months' time. On the 12th of February, the Council received further advice of an allocation of an additional $225,000. Both of those pieces of correspondence are attached to this report. In a rapidly moving environment, a series of additional grant rounds opened, which were primarily economic development and tourism focused. A number of them have subsequently been postponed because of the circumstances that we all find ourselves in with COVID. None of the grant providers prescribed an engagement process, but in an endeavour to understand community views in a short time frame, Council arranged a series of meetings with stakeholder groups, which in turn informed a broader meeting of community representatives to test a series of proposals for projects and ideas to expend the funds. As part of the process, Council received correspondence from a number of organisations outlining their proposals for how the funds could be spent, and they too are attached to this report. The proposals included correspondence from the Bellingen, Dorrigo and Urunga Chambers of Commerce. Bellingen Chamber of Commerce proposed an expenditure of $635,000 on vouchers, marketing and visitor attraction. Urunga Chamber proposal was similar at $640,000. Dorrigo Chamber corresponded with Council twice, proposed shopfront businesses receiving a one-off grant of $1,500 and other businesses also receiving a one-off grant of $1,000, festivals, advertising, promotion, establishing and upgrade of an evacuation centre and a contribution to the Chamber to administer the funds. Dorrigo does not support the voucher system as they do not believe it will benefit Dorrigo and it is not an equitable and proportionate sharing of the funds. The proposals put forward by the Chambers of Commerce were considered by a community panel which was convened, as were other proposals put to Council from other community groups and those developed internally. In terms of the process of the community panel, there was a ranking process that was undertaken when the panel convened, and there was a subsequent scoring process through a survey process. So from that, the findings were that the proposals put to Council, economic development was the lowest ranked score by theme. Visitation incentives or vouchers were seen as a low priority, and second from the bottom for the majority. The report that you have, in the interest of completeness and to give context, has included examples from other councils of how they allocated their funding. Of our neighbouring councils, and we have looked from Port Macquarie to Coffs Harbour, Port Macquarie included an allocation of $100,000 for marketing, campaign, tourism and business. Their allocation is higher than ours because they're a larger council. Coffs Harbour Council, again, their allocation is larger because they're a larger council, but they included an allocation for tourism and business support strategies to move visitors to affected areas of $68,000. Marketing was considered in the current round of projects that were put forward. However, at the current time, that can't occur. The proposed projects were workshopped with the councillors on a number of occasions to build the suite of projects that have been included in the report. As we've moved through the process of COVID-19, the elements of the project have been refined in conjunction with the council to consider the impact on our community and an ability to support resilience initiatives. It's important to note that concurrent to the work outlined in this report and as outlined in the report, Council has strongly advocated for Bellingen to be added by the state and Commonwealth governments to the list of council areas where non-flame affected businesses that have been bushfire affected can receive grants of $10,000. The council has conducted significant advocacy work in order to allow that to occur. It has moved through a number of steps in the process and is now being considered by the Commonwealth. we are hopeful of getting an answer very soon. In addition to that, the council has advocated very strongly to both the local health district and the primary health network for allocation of funding for our doctors who are running a clinic. The information, it's important to note that the information that's to be provided to the OLG it can be provided at a high level, and if need be, can be refined as we move through the process. And we've had that discussion with the OLG, and the reason for that approach is that it has been, the funding was issued very quickly, the guidelines are very broad, and they do understand that councils will have to work very quickly and nimbly with the projects. So I hope, Mr Mayor, that's of assistance to you.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, so I've got, now I'm going to open it up to questions. I've got Councillor Steve Jenkins first and then Councillor Jenny Fenton.
Mayor, I actually wanted to introduce a new motion in relation to this item.
Can we do that? I'll just ask if you could wait till we go through the questions, and then we can put up then I'll look for a move of the motion, and you could do that then, if that's okay, Councillor Jenkins. All right. The details for your information have been emailed to the Secretariat, General Manager and Deputy General Manager. Okay. Councillor Fenton.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think the you know, obviously we've been flooded with a lot of different information through chambers and individual businesses in the last few weeks about this particular funding bucket. I think we've been told all along that this is disaster recovery and resilience preparedness funding, whereas the chambers and the information they've obviously shared with individual businesses are maintaining it was recovery only. So I think that's a point that needs clarification, because the whole premise of that argument that we shouldn't be spending money on resilience and preparedness needs to be resolved before we could move forward, I think, in this discussion.
Mr Mayor, the information that has come from the federal government in a media release, I don't think I can get you to see it there, but a media release dated the 9th of January says, I'll just read you the first paragraph. The Morrison government will provide an initial and immediate base payment of $1 million to 42 of the most severely affected impacted councils in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia and Queensland to help quickly rebuild vital infrastructure and strengthen community resilience.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I've got Councillor Clip. Are you happy with that, Councillor Fenton?
Yeah, so I'm not sure where that confusion has come from in the business community, but I think it's a really important point to note that we're not just making a decision based on recovering from what happened. The whole point, because our impacts were quite lucky compared to a lot of other communities, you know, our opportunity is to be better prepared for next time, and that certainly came through strongly from community consultation.
And I think, look, I think our mental health and the amount of anxiety around the bushfires would show that, you know, our community certainly wants that surety that we're going to be able to communicate better, that we're going to have things in place. And I think that is part of the recovery. Councillor Clippin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have three questions, if I may. The first is to the General Manager. I wonder if you can comment about the process of consultation, and in particular how the people were made up of that large group that met in Bellingen. So who were those people, in inverted commas? I don't need to know their names, but in terms of, I'd imagine, a broad cross-section of the community, were there actual business owners or people who had, and business owners, let's be really clear, I don't mean people who own shops in the main streets of the towns, but anyone who's involved in a business trying to earn an income or a living? That's my first question. For ease sake, I might just ask three questions at once, because it's a bit harder to kind of, it might be a bit harder to manage. Is that okay, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Clifford.
Okay, so the second question is in terms of the spend. I'm curious to know how long the coordinator spend is for $140,000. Is that what length of time is that role imagined for? And so if it's helpful, that's item B, overarching resilience activity, with a resilience coordinator of 145. How long is that process? How long is that role for? And the third question is in terms of the item F, the economic recovery and development. The issues that have been postponed is, could you give some information, the two issues of event stimulus funds and a host tourism awards, those issues are being postponed. Is there any advice on the timing of that, of the funding tied to that, or the process of it?
So the General Manager, did you want to answer some of those?
I will, Mr. Mayor. Just give me a minute, please. To answer the first question, Mr. Mayor, my recollection is that we invited 28 people who were members of the community, essentially to represent a broad cross-section of the community. Some were as it happens, two of them were representatives of a Chamber of Commerce in Urunga. There would be business owners, there definitely are business owners in it, but we didn't necessarily select by business owner. We were more trying to satisfy a range of community perspectives in terms of where people are represented, if you like. Was it Dorrigo, or was it Urunga, or was it Bellingen? People who represented, we did have some economic people, as in terms of the Chamber of Commerce. We had people who represented food, we had people who represented environment, we had people who were experts in fire. So it was people who represented the neighbourhood centre. It was a group of people that was brought together very quickly. I think we made it clear at the meeting that we weren't pretending that it was perfect, but what we were trying to do was have a conversation with a broadly representative group of people in the community, as the council has talked about for some time. In terms of the spend and how long on the resilience officer, it's a year. The 140,000 is made up of wages on costs and equipment that is required to execute the role. In terms of the question about economic recovery and development and postponement, is there any advice retiming? No, not at this point.
Could I just add to what the General Manager said also, is that we did have consultations as well with the RFS, with National Parks, with the Red Cross, with SES, with the three chambers, and then we had a community meeting. I think not everyone that was invited came to that meeting, but I think there was a real understanding that we had a very, very short time frame. I know from talking to other mayors that most of the other councils have not done any community consultation. They've made a decision on where that money is going to be spent. So I think we have certainly given our community an opportunity, and surely, we realise that we didn't get everyone in that picture, but this was something that we pulled together quite quickly to make sure that we were getting through, and also to keep in mind that COVID wasn't even on the radar when this was happening. So I think that's a really, really important part of that. And I think the other thing about the employment, all of those other neighbouring councils, I've got you, Councillor Harrison, have also employed someone in that role of recovery. And I would say that person not only will be looking at the impacts of the bushfire, but would also look at the impacts on our economy as well. So some of this stuff overlaps into the economics as well. So I've got Councillor Harrison with a question. And then I've got Councillor Wright-Turner. Councillor Harrison, you're still muted, I think.
Yeah, I'm right now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The General Manager just explained to us the makeup of the community consultation. My question is, do you really feel that there was a broad enough, everybody was covered broadly enough to have a true representation from the three areas? I know that at one stage I was told that Dorrigo only has 15% of the population, but we do have a voice, and I don't think Bellingen or Urunga or Dorrigo were included enough in these conversations. I want your thoughts on it, please.
Okay, we've got the General Manager. Yep.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The initial group, what I would say to Councillor Harrison is, whilst we have had extensive discussions about establishing a demographically representative group of people as part of community panels, no one ever said that this was this, but it was a genuine attempt to engage with the community. Second to that, we invited a number of people from Dorrigo and only unfortunately received one. On the evening consultation session, as a consequence of that, another one was held. 33 were invited and 8 attended, noting it was at short notice, as was all of this.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, it's Michelle. Can I just ask councillors not to use the chat function because it's being live streamed with our meeting? You could just all close your chat function down.
So I got Councillor Wright-Turner. Did you want to? I think that are you happy with that, Councillor Harrison? Got Councillor Wright-Turner next.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're still on mute, Councillor Wright-Turner. Are you still on mute, Councillor Wright-Turner? Okay.
So I would just like a brief overview of what the Community Resilience Hub will look like. And the second part of the question that might be able to be done together is we've heard about the JO doing the micro community model. Would it be possible to have, just a brief overview of that as well, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll start with the micro community model. And I will actually also just touch on a couple of other things. The council undertook research, values-based social research last year called Why Local Government Matters. That research told us about communities' concerns about disaster preparedness and resilience. That survey was done across the 3 LGAs and was used to inform the 3 LGAs, of Kempsey, Port Macquarie and Bellingen, who are members of the Mid-North Coast JO, and that information was used to inform the regional strategic plan, with the focus in there also of disaster preparedness and resilience. In terms of that, that work has allowed the Mid-North Coast JO to secure a disaster preparedness officer for our region, who is based out of the JO but actually does work across the broader region to Coffs Harbour. One of the major projects that the disaster preparedness officer is carrying out is the micro community project, and that micro community project is about establishing actually running a pilot in each of the LGAs to see how micro communities can work well, and set up those communities to work as small groups of people who can support each other through disasters. That work is underway, and it is underway in relation to a group in Hydes Creek. In terms of the Community Resilience Hub, that's, if you like, a place and a virtual place, which has a look at the various elements of resilience to support communities in terms of whatever the issue of disaster or resilience happens to be. So it will host a whole range of things. It will host a whole range of programs. It'll be supported by a whole range of volunteers to help work with communities. And that project would obviously work hand in hand with the micro community project and other projects that are proposed in relation to the expenditure of these funds.
I might just add a little bit there, Councillor Wright-Turner, as well, is in the conversation with the RFS, they were very, very willing and supportive of the micro community model, especially what came out after the fires, that the fire sheds were seen as a community hub that already had a volunteer component to them already, and a hierarchy. So the commander showed, the area commander showed very keen interest in the RFS being involved in that micro community model as well. So, and I know that some of those have been existing already and are being built currently. So I think that's work that will go together. Have you got more? So Councillor Wright-Turner, you've got extra on that? Yep.
Could I just ask for a little bit more clarification? How do those aspects work? I mean, given that most businesses do lie within the town centres, what's the interface, you know, for businesses with both of those components?
The interface with the micro communities, I'm not sure the businesses have an interface with that. That is a very community-based function. In terms of the Community Resilience Hub, and you will see from the subsequent report, which is the third report in this business paper, you will see that as part of the Bellingen Shire pandemic response, a group of businesses have come together. In the scheme of things, as this rolls out over time, that would be housed either virtually or actually physically as part, and be a tranche in the Community Resilience Hub.
Okay, so I've got Councillor, was it Councillor Fenton? Did you have a question? Councillor Fenton?
I do, but you were reading my mind. If there was someone ahead of me, I'm happy to wait.
No, I think it was you.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to, my impression from, because we've had a number of workshops about this process that has gone through to find the projects. My understanding is that these that the funding needs to be expended in a 12-month over a 12-month process from the submission of these projects, or from when? Can we just get a clearer idea of what the parameters are on that?
Okay, I'm just waiting for the General Manager.
I'm just seeking clarification, Mr Mayor, just a minute.
Okay. Is there any further questions while we are waiting? I think the General Manager's back.
Through you, Mr Mayor, it is unclear. We think, as we understand it, it's from when we submit it, but there's actually the detail that was provided to the council was very brief.
Did you have a follow-up question, Councillor Fenton?
I had a question-y statement that I think that what's clear about micro communities for people who identify as living in one is that it is, the links to business is that it's the ultimate networking experience, to realise that your neighbourhood already contains a blacksmith, a hairdresser, a psychologist, a tiler, you know, a nurse and a doctor, and you know that you already have that in your neighbourhood. It's the ultimate networking level. So I think the opportunities through that model aren't just about support through a nice, you know, a meal or support with isolation. There's all kinds of potential around that model, which has been a bit more clearly outlined in some of the discussions we've had about that model.
Okay, is there any further questions, councillors? Councillor Wright-Turner.
I'd just like, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to confirm my understanding that the aspects of the sort of original funding proposals that were more directly related to businesses in tourist promotion and, you know, running events and that kind of thing have been overtaken by the needs of the COVID-19, and that there is a, you know, there's a substantial amount of assistance there that is put to one side at the moment, but to come back in the future. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in the list of recommendations, you see a number of projects which are postponed. The postponement was as a result of COVID-19.
Yeah, and I think that list was around $300,000, and I would imagine that we will, when we do get through this recovery, that we will see those opportunities arise again. And I think it's really important for us to realise the faster that we get through this and the faster that we get back to where we were in terms of getting visitors back into our shire is going to be the best thing that we can do for local business, as well as, you know, strengthening those networks we have already. Is there any further questions? Okay, I've got Councillor Harrison, and then I might, if there's no more urgent ones, I might make this the last one unless there is a real urgent question. Okay, Councillor Harrison. You're muted, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Harrison, you're still muted.
Shouldn't be. I'm
No,
right
you're on.
now.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following Councillor Wright-Turner's comment about the postponements, can it be guaranteed that these postponed activities be pulled back into the council's programs? Because I feel that many people out there in the community would be disillusioned if they knew there was no guarantee that they would be pulled back in.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, they're different funding rounds. So what you have in front of you is a report which looks at not only the $1.2 million bushfire funding, but subsequent funding that was announced, and to the value of around $380,000. So they're separate grants. So the 1.25 million has been an allocation, I think is the best way to put it, to council to expend as it sees fit. The 380,000 are a number of separate grant rounds which council will. We have applied for one because the deadline date has passed, but we can adjust it if that's the will of the council. But there's no guarantee of those. They've been postponed for now, and hopefully they will be reinstated.
Thank you.
And I would add to that, Councillor Harrison, that I was in the Local Government New South Wales meeting today, and they are certainly advocating for financial stimulus for local government, for local businesses when this comes through as well. So there's certainly, you know, a realisation that this is happening all over the country, if not all over the world, that small businesses are suffering so badly at the moment because we're all in lockdown. So I would imagine that the government will honour those. Okay, so I've got a question from Councillor Clippin, and I might make that the last one, I think. Councillor Clippin. Councillor Clippen? Councillor Clippen, can you not hear me?
Yeah, I can. Thank you. I just couldn't unmute myself.
Okay.
Some people may think that's a bit funny. So my question to the General Manager, if I may, is I heard her say something that passed me just by the by because it was such a wealth of information, that whilst Bellingen Shire was not a flame-affected affected community, the Commonwealth Government or the state government, I wasn't sure, has a program for flame-affected communities, which we are trying to get onto, which in the case of that being successful, is that will allocate money to individual businesses. Is that, did I hear that properly?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. A couple of weeks ago, there was an announcement of an allocation of 10,000 grants for non-flame affected, bushfire affected businesses of $10,000. When it came to my attention that Bellingen has not been included in that list, I immediately started to advocate to the state and Commonwealth governments about that. So my engagement around this has been through the Office of Emergency Management, through the member for Oxley's office. There's been engagement with the Deputy Premier's office. There's been engagement with the member for CalPA. The way it works is that initial funding was completely Commonwealth funded. Any subsequent requests for areas, and there are a couple, will have to be funded 50-50 by the state and Commonwealth governments. It has moved to consideration by the Commonwealth government, so the advocacy to date has been effective.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So I will now move to Councillor Jenkins, as he was looking for an amendment to that item 8.1.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it wasn't an amendment, it was a new motion.
Okay. So we'll get you to, that's been sent. I'm just wanting to know if the executive's got that.
It was sent to the executive earlier and I've since sent it to all councillors.
Okay, could I get you to read that out, Councillor Jenkins? Because I think there's a few people that haven't got access to email as they're on their computers. So it might be easier for you to read out that new motion.
Okay, I'll read verbatim. That this matter be referred back to council to have the list of projects/activities revised to better reflect the type referred to by the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Emergency Management as stated in the relevant media release dated 9 January 2020. In particular, the statement by the Prime Minister who indicated that the funding was to be used, quote, open inverted commas, to help quickly rebuild vital infrastructure and strengthen community resilience, close inverted comma, and the intended uses as summarised at the end of the media release, which identified that, quote, councils will be able to spend their $1 million payments on projects and activities that they deem essential for the recovery and renewal of their communities, including, one dot point, rebuilding damaged and destroyed council assets, such as key local roads, bridges and community facilities. Second dot point, employing additional staff to take on specialist recovery or planning roles to help coordinate and plan the rebuilding effort. Third dot point, hosting new public activities and events to bring communities together and attract visitors back to the affected regions. And final dot point, immediate maintenance and repairs to relief and evacuation centres. And I also included a copy of the URL for the relevant media release.
Okay, so we are looking for a seconder for that motion.
Mr. Mayor, can I bring a couple of matters to council's attention before council decides if it would like to second that? The first matter is we need to have advice to the New South Wales Government by the 10th of April. The second point I would make is that, yes, that was information in a media release. The documentation that council got from the OLG was that they wanted a program of works. Very little in Bellingen LGA was damaged or destroyed. There were very few damaged or destroyed council assets, and indeed there are funding programs for assets, as we know from floods, that often cover that kind of repair. Thirdly, this proposal does propose to employ staff for recovery. At the moment, we can't host new public activities and events, and we don't know when we will be able to. And the project proposals, as they are presented, does look at facilitating repairs to evacuation centres and other facilities such as halls. So the other thing, just for the benefit of councillors, is that the council can amend the projects that they submit, as I outlined before. Government does understand it is a process that is not defined well, and that councils may need to amend their projects as they move through the process. So I hope that's of assistance to you.
Okay. Were you after a point of clarification, Councillor Fenton, or is that okay? Point of clarification?
Yeah, am I able to ask Councillor Jenkins what the point of that new motion is? My understanding is that's very much the list of projects we have covers those things as needed, as recommended by staff and through the engagement process. So I'm confused about why that's different or important.
So that was deferring the decision, I think. Councillor Fenton was the main gist of that, and then rejigging those projects. But anyway, we haven't got a seconder yet, so I'm going to ask again if we've got a seconder for that proposal. If not, that has not got up. Okay, so now I'm looking for a mover for the recommendation. Councillor Clippen.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move it with a change, so I'm just not 100% certain. Mechanism for that is, so happy to always take advice from the Deputy General Manager or the General Manager.
Okay, so so you've got an amendment to the original recommendation, Councillor Clippen?
Yeah, it's a fairly simple one, but yes.
Okay, so if you read that out, and then we'll get either the General Manager or the Deputy General Manager to make sure that fits with the governance requirements.
Perfect. So it's just it's the recommendation reads as is, except for item F reads as follows. So item F has got a dot point 1 and I, and then dot point 1, dot point 2 remain as is, because that is for the future, and that the following dot points be considered as follows, and I read and quote, that the food hub concept, pilot and phase 2 money and disaster recovery money of $145,000 be submitted to the grant administrator with subsequent consultation with the business chambers to define the works.
Okay, so we're looking at what?
Mr. Mayor, could I ask Councillor Clippen to say that again, please?
Would it be helpful if I sent it to you?
It would be.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to just provide advice procedurally. So what Councillor Clippen has done in effect, because there's no motion on the table, there's a recommendation, is he's moved a motion which reads the same as the recommendation, but with those words he just added.
Okay, so 1 and 2 stays the same. 3, 4 and 5 are brought back to consultation. Is that right, Councillor Clippin?
So item 1,
which is 50,000 from the bushfire resilience and economic pilot.
So it might be easier through you, Mr. Mayor, if I just speak to it without the exact words right now, with your permission.
Speak to the motion.
No, just speak to the amendment that I'm looking for. Oh, it's not an amendment; it's a change.
Okay. Yep.
So if everyone can see their council paper and it's got the letter F and then economic recovery and development of $275,000, that we allocate item 3, 4 and 5, the Food Hub concept pilot, the Food Hub phase 2, and the resilience disaster response, that 125 get added together, and that it gets submitted to the grant administrator. As the General Manager advised, that it is possible to submit higher level ideas with more detail to come in the future, and that then offers the opportunity for subsequent consultation with business chambers, who I sense is the only group that feels like, and it's a feeling, it's not necessarily thinking, that feels like they have been hard done by. And as a previous business person, I understand that could be irrespective of COVID, could have been something that they could have felt quite strongly. And so the idea of the subsequent consultation is to give us as a council, notwithstanding that we're not required to consult, an opportunity to consult better. It may not yield a different outcome.
So have we got those words?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind,
Yep.
I think I just want to clarify what Councillor Clippin is saying. So 1 and 2 as is, under F, 1 and 2 as is because they're postponed. 3, 4 and 5, which adds up to 145,000. You would like a further discussion about. So perhaps the way to do it is to, and I'm trying to clarify if this is Councillor Clippin's intent, is that his motion is 1 to E as is, F 1 and 2 as is, and a new 3, that there be that the submission include a project for economic recovery and development to the value of 145,000, and there be further consultation about that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Okay, so we're looking for a seconder for that motion. You're happy to second that, Councillor Fenton? Okay. So I would ask Councillor Clippin to introduce that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd start off by saying I raise my hat, doff my cap to the staff and the leadership of this council that was willing to go through a consultation process as the dark clouds of Corona were appearing on the horizon. It was a brave step. I note that our neighbouring councils did not do that. They allowed the executive function of the general manager and whatever consultation process that person had in order to basically take advantage of, in inverted commas, taxpayers' money to fund some very broad-ranging activities. So that's the first thing I want to come and start with. The second thing I want to come and start with is, it's at moments like this that it's it's easy to drop the veneer of good governance. It's at moments like this that it's easy to just have a veneer of good governance, which are empty words rather than actually good governance. And I think that this project speaks again volumes to the governance processes that our council has put in place over a number of years. And it was interesting from my own perspective, looking back at some of my election flyers of 3.5 years ago, was that good governance was certainly one of the things that I stood for and stand for it now again, even though or especially though we're in a time of great conflict about how to spend money, but greater crisis and a sense of unparalleled experience that we're all going through. I think the last thing that I would want to say about this is consultation processes always require both hands to come together. They require a hand and a glove, or whatever metaphor is best used here. And in one sense, it's always easy to say, oh, the consultation process wasn't deep enough, or it wasn't enough people, or it wasn't representative enough, or whatever. And unfortunately or fortunately, we got elected as councillors, and we need to support or not support that the consultation process was as robust as it could be given the time. Even the most successful consultation processes always have those who feel like they might be on the outer. And that just brings me to the business chambers. There's no doubt that anybody who is in small business, so during the bushfire period, those people who were in small business on the main streets felt the anguish of visitation numbers down by anywhere between 40 to 60% or more. Anyone who was in small business on the main street, and now I do speak from personal experience, felt the anguish of getting through that period and hoping for a bumper summer to kind of see us through to Easter, and then just everything kind of disappear. So I get that, I absolutely get that. And so if we can do something coming out into the COVID time and beyond, where it's not just Main Street businesses, it's legal practices, it's accountants, it's pretty much anyone who's not serving food to people, or who are comfortable in some kind of government or government funded job. And now I do include myself as a school person again, so it's not a government funded, but the government supporting schools, is we are in a really tricky time. And I would like to see that our towns do not come out of COVID, and that we're looking at half boarded up shops in the main street, and that half boarded up shops from Urunga all the way through to Dorrigo, and that we're not seeing people who normally would have had a few extra bob to spend because they were working in government, in professional services, still have something to do. And so whilst it's only 10% of the money or thereabouts, I think that it goes a long way to showing a sense of care, of going a sense of instruction of how we can come together and supporting our local businesses, whatever that looks like. And let me just say from the outset that some of the ideas that came up with, and particularly in the voucher system, is I'm not certain that that was considered in a way that answered some of my queries about governance and about the capability to administer such a project. So that's the way I'm introducing this, and again, just looking for the kind of support that this will have, because as a council, these truly are unparalleled times.
Thank you, Councillor Clippan. Is there a speaker against? Is there another speaker for? I've got Councillor Fenton.
Yeah, I echo Councillor Clippan's comments about the body of work that went in to come up with this list. I think that given the time frames, I mean, I've heard about how this process went down in other councils where it was thrown to department heads to come up with projects of priority within each of their sections, and that was it. So I do commend staff on the reach that happened in very short time frames, and you know, I think that what I also support about this list is there is a bit of flexibility within each of those categories. I think that's been written well so that there's the opportunity to respond to, well, obviously the big thing we need to respond to is this pandemic environment that we're working in, which makes the delivery of some projects impossible, and we need to be able to roll and have that flexibility around that, I guess. I think there's a lot more that we need to be doing around the businesses we have and what we call a business, because you know, that package of points around a food hub, for example, you know, we don't hear from growers and primary producers very much. They don't come to meetings very much, and they're not often represented, but they probably outstrip our main street businesses. You know, I would suggest 2 to 1 based on my rough figures. So I think that chance to have a greater talk with a bigger range of businesses, I think, is really, really important around that section of the funding. You know, that most businesses will take a massive hit and they may or may not survive. There's no way around that. That's not a Bellingen thing. That's happening all over the planet right now. And any countries that aren't experiencing that, or communities that aren't experiencing it, will. So that's the reality. Is economically, we're experiencing something massive across the globe right now. But there's, you know, there are key businesses that provide essential services that are going to do better than they ever have, and we're seeing that already. There's other businesses that are adapting rapid fire. I don't know how that's going for them. It'd be great to find out. But there's one whole group that has a chance to keep our local economy alive, and that is growers. And, you know, I strongly support having detailed conversations with that sector to find out how we can strengthen our local economy through what we're producing locally and value adding locally. And any little bit of break with this multinational scale capitalist model that we've got, where food arrives in semi-trailers, is going to help our local economy and our local businesses. You know, I think that what we're seeing on social media, a young woman started a Facebook group about what local businesses are open, what deliveries they're doing, who's providing takeaway. It's got over 500 members. They've had thousands of engagements. That's the sort of stuff we need to make sure we're supporting, is supporting those businesses that can stay open with our custom. I think, you know, there's been some of the letters that we've received have asked us not to consider the environment at this point over business, but the environment is our business. That underpins every bit of business we do. And I think, you know, the projects that have come from the community and the chambers about, you know, improvements in fire trails, for example, or advocacy around our natural assets, are absolutely about underpinning what is our economy in this shire. We don't have an economy based on people looking at a giant artificial structure. That's not our economy. Our economy is about our natural assets. I think there's lots of room.
Okay, Councillor, I might give the other councillors an opportunity, if that's okay.
Could I just make one more point, Mr. Mayor, through you? I think that the step we need to do next, though, that maybe it could even, you know, I'm sure that's what the General Manager's working on, but is to make a clear representation to federal and state governments about what small rural communities like ours need to stay economically viable, because, you know, the whole stuff that came out of the chambers around vouchers is not going to wash in a COVID environment. So we need to find things that will, and we need to work together to make that happen, and also working together to look at how we do business differently. Because, you know, one of those letters from the chambers referred to us being open for business. The reality is we're not. No one's open for business right now. We need to find different ways of doing that together.
Okay. Thank you. I've got Councillor Carter. I'm going to let people have a speak for this as well. So I've got Councillor Carter and I've got then Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Carter first. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was somehow thinking we're doing the wrong thing with so many emails about the same issue, especially what's coming out of the Dorrigo area. And what they're talking about is the problems that have already occurred. I think what Council is promoting in this resolution is fixing the future so the past doesn't repeat itself. And I'm sort of standing in the middle, agreeing with both sides of this complex issue. After talking to Steve Clippin this morning, I think Councillor Clippin's amendment for a compromise is good governance, and I think everyone should vote in favour of it.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Councillor Harrison.
I wish to speak against it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Harrison. Sorry, I did ask for speakers against.
Yeah, I did put my hand up, but never mind. That's how it goes. We're learning. I feel as a council, and I'm only speaking about the bushfire recovery, I'm not speaking about COVID-19. I think generally, as a council, initially, we let the business houses down. We needed to go out there and spend some money initially on advertising, instead of being told we're going to depend on destination North Coast or destination somebody else. If we could have spent $150,000 on advertising to say that we are still open for business, we would have helped all those businesses dramatically. We are now in a position, and I can only speak for Dorrigo, but I know there are quite a number of businesses in Bellingen that may face closure as well. Had they received support in the early days, they may not be closing their businesses now. Many of these businesses will not qualify to get the $10,000 that's being offered now for the coronavirus money. Each and every one of us as councillors had one of these business people, or some of these business people, put a cross against our name when they voted for us. So on a moral basis, I feel that we have let them down. I don't know how we can help them go back now if this resolution goes through. So that's my feeling. I've been in business. I feel sorry for the people that have worked so hard to keep their businesses open. And I've got a very husky voice today. I'm not sick, but that is a hangover from 5 months of smoke in Dorrigo. I still suffer from chest problems. And we needed support along with others, and we didn't get that initial support. So thank you everybody for listening to my point of view.
Okay, so another speaker. Okay, so there's no other speakers. I would like to acknowledge that we are a community that has been in horrific circumstances for a long period of time here. It was the drought, it was the fires, and now it was COVID. And I understand the anxiety and the fear in the community about a whole range of things. And I don't think anyone is in a position to know what is coming next. And I think that's a really, really scary proposition for everyone. And I can understand the angst of local businesses that were thriving 6-8 months ago, now are going, we haven't had any turnover. So I absolutely hear the fear in the community. I think as councillors and as local government, we realise that we are the closest form of government to the people, and we are the best way forward for our communities. And I think I would take Councillor Carter's thoughts and expand on them and say that we do need to look at what's happening right now, but we also need to look at what's happening in the future. And when we come out of this, we need to have better structures to look after all the people in our shire, every resident in our shire. And this is our opportunity to get stronger community networks and ties, and they will flow on to business, as Councillor Fenton said. So this is a really, really tough time. We will continue to advocate for our businesses and our economy to get the support that they need. We're seeing the federal government do that for big business. We need to do that now for businesses that have 1, 2, 3 employees, sole traders who are out there that are struggling as well. Not people that have got 17 employees. We need to make sure that there's, that our state and federal MPs know that local government needs this money to move forward. But we also need to make sure that we are strengthening what we already have. And I think our response to COVID, I don't think there's anyone in Australia that has responded as fast and as thorough as this community. and we did an amazing job in the fires as well. We need to build on that. This is the opportunity to do that. I understand the fear from the business chambers, but you know, a voucher system, you know, who benefits from that? What shops will benefit more than others? Who looks after that? Giving money to individual businesses, where does that stop? Does that go to sole traders? Does that go, which business gets more, which gets less? Like, it's so complex. So I think Councillor Clippen's motion gives us some thinking time about that. It gives us some more consultation time about that. You know, we certainly do not dismiss the concerns of local business in this chamber, and we have conversations very, very often about the way forward. And you know, I would assure that the businesses that we are listening, but we need to make sure that we're doing the right things. And we've got to, all we make our decisions on are our advice, our facts, and then what we feel is the right thing for the greater good of this shire. And I think that's what everyone in the chamber does. So, you know, I think this motion is a way forward. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to please everyone, but it's the best that we can do in a very, very dire situation. Okay, so I'm going to give Councillor Clippen the right of reply, and then I'm going to put it. Councillor Clippen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I've listened to all the comments that people have made and appreciate them. I've listened carefully. I think that we are struggling at the moment. We're a community that's struggling to find new ways to go forward. I think that's true for each of us in our own individual lives, whether we're at home, whether we're trying to do this kind of stuff at home, whether we're trying to find ways to work, whether we're trying to find ways to support our children or our parents or whatever that looks like. We're struggling, and everybody's experiencing that. I won't use the word unparalleled because it's being used to death. In terms of context, you know, no other set of councillors has ever had to deal with these number of issues concurrently, and that's an important thing just for us to take a moment and kind of go. I'm sure when we stood for the role of councillor, we didn't imagine that we would have to deal with these kinds of things. We stood for a range of issues, and we stood because we wanted to support our community. And I'm sure all the way up any kind of elected leadership tree, all the way to the Prime Minister and to leaders of other countries, in the dark of night are kind of going, I actually didn't step up for this. However, as I was saying to my 20-year-old, is leadership's not optional when you get into a position. You have to show up with the best you've got, with everything that you have, to try and make the best decision in a time that you might not be well equipped for. And I think that together as a council, we are much stronger when we're together. And united we stand and divided we fall. And that doesn't mean that every voice has to concur 100% with the resolution. However, the more that we are united in how we're going forward, and the incredible steps that have been taken by our executive staff and a myriad of volunteers as well. I appreciate the Mayor's welcome at the beginning, acknowledging all of the workers, but also all of the volunteers who have stepped up in so many ways to find a way forward, that this disaster money that has come to us is indeed a gift, and that we're spending it incredibly well. And I would be delighted to see a consensus position on this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so now I will put it, and I'll ask you to raise your hand on the screen. I can see everyone. All those in favour? So I've got Councillor Fenton, Councillor Wright-Turner, Councillor Clippen, Councillor Carter, Councillor King. Against? Councillor Jenkins, Councillor Harrison. So that motion has passed. Okay, so we'll move on to item 11.2, which is the coronavirus or the COVID-19 business and community support phase 1. I do have the CEO, the Chief Financial Officer here, so I've got him there for questions if councillors need any questions around answered around this. So I'll open it up to questions first.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we're actually going into 11.1, which is the Bellingen Shire Pandemic Response Report. And the CFO's report is 11.2.
Oh, sorry, they're back to front in my paper. I apologise for that. I wonder why Councillor Fenton was shaking her head. Okay, so it's 11.1, which is the Bellingen Shire Pandemic Response. And we do have, obviously, our staff here if people have got some questions, but I think, as I've very, very clearly said, and I think everyone in this, you know, I meant to say in this room, but we're not in the same room, you know, realises how much we, you know, that people have stepped up already in our community, and it shows how strong we are right across this shire, as we did with the fires. And I think, you know, it's been a fantastic response. We have got, you know, we've got a testing facility within our shire, which is so important to manage this. And we've got backup for the most vulnerable in our community, and we've got a whole network of volunteers and people working towards doing the absolute best we can to contain this. So I will open it up for questions before I look for a mover. Okay, there doesn't look like there is anyway, so I'm looking for a mover. Okay, Councillor Fenton's fast. She's got that. Seconder, Councillor Wright-Turner. Councillor Fenton, did you want to introduce this? Did you want to speak to it,
Yes,
Councillor Fenton?
yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I'm juggling 2 computers and only 1 brain. I think that, yeah, it's been a roller coaster ride, you know, from when this outbreak happened so far away in a people whose lifestyle we think of as being so different to our own, to the realisation that it's coming, and it's, you know, could have massive implications on our community and also our nation. But I think, you know, it's been a very impressive effort put in by council. I've had constant feedback from people in the community who've been involved or who haven't, that they really appreciate the leadership and the long hours that council staff have been putting in, and the funding that council staff have been putting in to get the clinical action group running and the clinic up and running, when it wasn't slated to have that facility here in a community this small. The neighbourhood care network is something we really want as many people to be involved in as possible, and it's just about formalising communications within neighbourhoods. That's all that is, which I think that process will give us the opportunity to respond to all kinds of disasters. Because when we talk about, hang on, my computer's about to fall asleep. When we talk about, you know, we've just been through a drought and then a fire, and then we had floods as well, and a plague of mosquitoes, I think most of us experienced somewhere in between before this pandemic. You know, we can't, you know, we're a council that's recognised that we're in a climate emergency. We can't expect to get through this and then we're done. We're back to normal. I think it's fair to say the world's changing, and these kind of extreme events are only going to become more common. So I think setting up that network is a really vital start, and it might be a bit clunky and messy to start with, and there's a lot of stuff to sort out, but that formal connection with the people who are most likely to keep you safe and you are most likely to be able to help is your neighbours. You know, and particularly, as you said, Mr. Mayor, around vulnerable people. You know, also there's the group that's been working on business support and adaptation. There's so much work to be done in there, which I rambled on around previously, that we need to change our business model. That's the fact. There's a whole heap of the world's gone online, and they're in a better spot for it right now, have face-to-face presence, but also an online presence. And, you know, that this sort of change is going to make or break a lot of businesses. So it's great to see that group of chambers and economic experts get together and do some of that work, because we're not just going to need it now, we're going to need it into the future. So I think, you know, an amazing body of work that should have really taken a couple of years to get organised has been pulled together in, you know, a month really. So well done.
Okay, is there any other speakers for? Oh, is there a speaker against? Sorry. I didn't imagine that would be there. Is there any other speakers that are for? Okay, so if there's no opposition, I will put it. All those in favour? Okay, I'm seeing, I haven't seen, oh, yep, so that's unanimous. Now we'll go to item 11.2, and we do have the Chief Financial Officer here, Chris. There's a whole list of recommendations about support that we can have for our community in these times, and I know that this is a first draft of many, many conversations that we will have as councillors and that are being held all over the state with councils all over the state under the same amount of pressure and the same amount of scrutiny about what we're going to do into the future. So if there is any questions there, we do have Chris, so I will open it up to questions. I've got Councillor Clippen for the first one.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. This might be either to Chris Hodge or to the General Manager. My question is around civic leadership, and issue number one is that the General Manager be granted delegation to provide rent relief for all council managed properties, etc. I just wonder if there's a way that we might be able to leverage that from a moral perspective, or moral and leadership perspective, to let the wider business community know, or to let landlords know by way of a letter to them that this is one of the things that council is doing in a manner to support our local businesses who have got rent issues as well. So it's just looking at the leverage option. Of course, nobody can be compelled to do that, but it might be a nice nod in that direction, also relating to the previous issue that we raised. I think the opportunity there also is to let businesses know that our Main Street rental rate prices relative to our neighbours is quite favourable, and it might be a good time to remind them of that, noting that at the moment it's very easy for any of us, and I include myself in this, to fall into the poor me situation. Like, all of us could do that. Poor me, I'm working too hard. Poor me, I'm stuck at home with a whole bunch of people. Poor me, I'm stuck at home with nobody, or whatever that looks like. And I don't say that by way of kind of diminishing that feeling. I say that by way of kind of really looking for an opportunity to extend a hand, a moral and leadership hand of to that. And I wonder whether that might be something that the executive staff might consider. So that's either to Chris or to the General Manager, if I may.
I'll start, Councillor Clippen. Yes, we will do that. We will make sure there is an awareness that this is the initiatives, and they are initial initiatives that Council is undertaking. What I will also do is ask the CFO, because I actually only have one computer, so I can't actually look at other things, unfortunately, but I did ask the CFO for some advice this morning around the business rate relative to our neighbours, so I might ask him to speak to that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, look, in terms of our businesses here, so this recommendation is obviously specific to the businesses where we are the landlord. So for all businesses within the Shire, for all landlords across Australia, we're asked to show compassion through this crisis. So this is our way of doing that. In terms of the average rates across the Shire, this is kind of a different question, but our business rates are lower than the state average. They're much lower than the regional average as well. Sorry, I don't have the figures in front of me here. Sorry, Liz, but yeah, I can provide those at a later date if you wish.
Councillors, we will send them to you just so you have them to hand. We have looked at them previously.
And I think we have spoken about them as well. So I've got Councillor Clippen's got a finish on that. Then I've got Councillor Jenkins, and then I've got Councillor Fenton. Councillor Clippen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the question to the General Manager is, in terms of recommendation, is there need, or will you just take that on notice for action that we will show civic leadership by way of advising landlords in the Bellingen Shire main streets in particular, I guess, which is where council-owned properties of the council's action, in line with the federal government's request to landlords to show show leniency or whatever the appropriate wording is.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we will just do that. That's fine.
Okay, so Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just 2 points on that. I think it's entirely appropriate, considering the state government and government departments, etc., are all showing some sort of leniency in this respect. But I just want to flag an air of caution. We're doing that as a landlord to our tenants within the Shire. Might there be some repercussion from that, albeit not intentional, from the ratepayers?
Possibly.
I suppose we just need to be mindful of that and how we couch the information.
And I would say that this is a conversation that is being had, as I said, with Local Government New South Wales today. This is a conversation that's being had across the country. But there's also got to be an understanding that we need to continue to deliver our services. We need to continue to pay our staff. Small councils like us do not have big buckets of money. We have a small ratepayer base and a large area. Hopefully, we can do the best that we can. And I think that'll be, as I said earlier on, I think that'll be an evolving body of work for us to be involved in, to see what those repercussions are if we talk about rate relief in any way. But I would also remind people that we do have provisions in place already, hardship provisions, and they are things that we will probably have more requests around in the next the coming months, and that's a better way to deal with it than having a blanket. Some people are fine. Some people are, in terms of their financial status, are fine. And so, we really need to make sure that we're targeting the right people if there is need for rate relief or deferment of payments, etc.
I do have one more comment too, please, Mr. Mayor. Should the motion include reference or some sort of reference to if the council does receive some sort of financial support from the state or federal governments in terms of this COVID-19 crisis that we're experiencing, that some of that funding be repatriated back to the bushfire, the 8.1 motion that went through?
Look, I think there's motions that people can put up as we go along. I mean, we're going to continue to meet as a council, and I think that's a motion that can be put up if that funding happens. I don't want to be playing a guessing game of when that might happen, but I'm sure the state and federal government will be hearing very loudly from local government areas all over the place that that we need a different bucket of money, which is a COVID bucket of money, and they're going to get value out of that, out of making sure that local government target that in the right places, because we know who needs it, we know who's going to use it best. So I think that's a really important part of moving forward. So I've got Councillor Fenton.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I understand, I heard the General Manager say this is phase one. I think that's in the title of this section. It's phase one of looking at options for reducing fees and charges. I know that general rates and the rate rises proposed, which would be starting on 1st of July, will be a growing conversation in the community. Could we have a report soon about what that would look like if we didn't proceed with that rate rise, what that would look like in terms of which roads won't get done? Because I know that's purely about bringing roads up from poor standard to a higher standard, and I mean, it would be a good chance for us to look at what has been done under that rate rise program as well, but what that would mean leaving undone. So if I could request that for the next meeting. Yeah, I think we need to sort of be quite clear about why we're not just suspending rates altogether. I've certainly received a number of representations from people saying, why don't we just drop rates? I don't think there's an understanding in the community that council can only provide the services it does and be the biggest employer in the Shire, which has a huge economic impact because of rates and grants. So that we don't have development funds to splash around and to cover that kind of thing. I think some clear communication about a pie chart level kind of discussion of how we operate is going to be a really useful thing right now as we come into that discussion. And I really support the concept of those fees, charges and rates being a hardship-based approach, because when it's a blanket approach, what you see is the rich getting richer. And at this situation, we're in where we have a lot of people who are going from, who are living hand to mouth. What we don't want to see is any of our collective wealth going towards people who already have multiple assets. We need to be quite careful in that approach. So I commend that policy.
Did anyone want to? Did any of the senior management team want to comment on that? I would just say that there is also there's a legal implications to this as well, and the Act doesn't allow you to actually just start slicing rates up. And I think that's a really, really important sort of question going forward as well, is what's allowable. And I think one of the other things that I would say is there's certainly been, and I had this conversation with the General Manager, there's certainly been some talk around the speeding up of infrastructure projects by state government. So, there is some opportunities possibly for us to move forward with some of them. And I know, once again, that's a changing feast, but that was certainly another item that was spoken about this morning in Local Government New South Wales, because people are getting that same letter. I've seen the General Manager with a hand up wanting to make a comment on that. So I'll just ask you to comment further on that, please.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. We wanted to put this report up as quickly as we could. We've put into this report the things that we know we can do immediately and where we should carry out strong advocacy. We are certainly seeking advice about procedurally deferring the rate rise, and we will come back to Council with a comprehensive answer in order that a properly considered decision can be made in terms of process and implications to the Council's longer term plans. It is true, definitely, councillors, that we are being approached by various parts of state and Commonwealth government around stimulus funding, and we will do as we do regularly, seek to absolutely maximise that. And there will be a broader consideration of then what that means going forward. So we will do all that we can to ease this for everybody. And it is really pleasing to hear government talking so early about stimulus, because what that will mean is more local jobs.
Thank you, Liz. Is there any further questions? Okay, so I'm looking for you've got a question, Councillor Harrison? No, you're muted. No, Councillor Harrison, you're still muted.
I've got a finger. May I ask a general question of Chris, please?
Yeah,
regarding
sure.
our finances? Chris, how are our finances hanging on now with all the upheaval that's been occurring on the stock exchange? One would hope that we're still in a wonderful financial position.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, obviously this isn't addressed in this report, but we've got a number of our income sources that, of course, are impacted by this crisis, especially our investments at the moment. The share market's taken quite a dive, as we've all seen. The good news is we've only got a 7% exposure to the share market, so most of our assets are defensive assets, but even that 7% exposure has had quite a hit. So I'll update you on that at the next council meeting anyway. And in terms of other income sources that are impacted, that'll be as a further report to council in the future as well.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Councillor Jenkins, did you have a question or?
No, I was just prepared to move if you're ready.
Okay, so I've got a mover in Councillor Jenkins, looking for a seconder, Councillor Clippen. All those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous. And I will close the meeting at, I'm just trying to find the time, 4:43. Thank you so much, councillors. Thank you, staff.